I'd like to start this talk by making an admission to all of you. I am not an art historian by trade or by education, but what really interested me about Piranesi and his etchings was the fact that he was so engaged and so interested in the history and in the mythology behind the things that he portrayed. That's what got me excited. And as the speakers before me have mentioned, he was a proto-archaeologist, and he tried his best to actually represent what he thought was being displayed, and to give them the correct names. But as the world-famous and very renowned archaeologist Indiana Jones once said, X rarely marks the spot. And in this case, I think we can say that takes the cake for Piranesi too. This presentation will explore how these misattributions contributed to Piranesi's various works and the enduring fascination with Rome's monumental past. But first, let's start with some background on the Appian Way. All the prints that I'll be talking, or the print that I'm specifically talking about in this presentation is on the Appian Way. Statius, in his contemporary work, the Silvae, called the Appian Way the queen of long-distance roads. Stretching from the Roman Forum all the way to modern-day Brindisi, this road was one of the first constructed in Roman history, with its first portions completed in 312 BCE. At its peak, Rome was the largest city in the world. With over 1 million people at its peak, supporting that population required a great deal of trade and transportation of goods along its various roads. That included about 435,446 tons of wheat per year just to feed the city. But alongside those long carriage trains of traveling tradesfolk were visitors from all around the Roman world. This made the roads outside Rome a key place for families to place their monuments to their status so that all who entered Rome knew of their glory. The most common monuments to ancient Rome's powerful families were the family tombs and mausoleums they constructed. After all, the legendary First Law Code of Rome, the 12 Tables, had rules specifically explaining that the dead of Rome must be buried outside the city walls. So, what more perfect way to build a monument to your family and be a good Roman citizen than to bury your dead outside the city and build a grand mausoleum along the way? Before you now is the largest of the tombs that remain on the Appian Way, the Casale Rotondo. Although, like most tombs along the way, there is little that we still know about its original construction. Carbon dating has found that the material was likely mined and constructed during the age of Emperor Augustus, but its original builders, alongside the family who constructed it, remain a mystery to us, leaving questions in our mind that add to the mythology of ancient Rome. Piranesi picked up on just that mystery and mythology. Throughout his many etchings and engravings of Rome, tombs sparked his eye a great deal. The following is one such depiction. In this image, you can see how Piranesi depicted these two tombs as towering monuments dedicated to two mighty Roman families. With detail focused on the ruined state of these tombs and the figures tumbling in the foreground, Piranesi is drawing a stark contrast between the glory of ancient Rome and his contemporary state of the city. To tell the story of the powerful families that Piranesi attributes these tombs to, we will first discuss the tomb of the Cornelii. The Cornelii were one of the most prominent families of ancient Rome. They were known for producing more famous Roman statesmen and generals than any other family in Rome. During the era of Rome's Republic alone, it is estimated that the Cornelii contributed at least 75 consuls to lead the Roman Republic. The most well-known member of this family, however, is most commonly said to be Scipio Africanus. Scipio Africanus came to notoriety as the main architect behind Rome's victory against Carthage in the Second Punic War. Scipio Africanus led his armies during a desperate time. Rome had just witnessed one of its largest defeats in its history, when it lost 60 to 80,000 soldiers, or 20% of its fighting-age population, in just 2 days of fighting at the Battle of Cannae. With Carthage's armies, led by Hannibal Barca, now roaming unchallenged through Rome's countrysides, the young republic felt that it was only a matter of time before Carthage was at Rome's gates. Despite this environment of fear, Scipio Africanus quickly rose through the ranks, inspiring his fellow Romans to fight back and becoming military tribune and later consul, even though he was technically too young to hold the position. Throughout his campaigns, Scipio Africanus regained the upper hand by defeating Carthaginian armies across the Roman world, culminating in the peace against the Carthaginians in the 3rd century BCE. With the magnanimity and grace of the rounded and stylized tomb that Piranesi depicts, it is no wonder that he would have attributed the tomb to only a mighty family like that of Scipio Africanus. But what does the archaeology have to say about this?
As is detailed in archaeologist Rodolfo Lanciani's Companion Guide for Archaeological Sites in Rome, the tomb of the Scipios was likely initially discovered in the early 1600s with artifacts pulled from the tomb during the 17th century. Whoever initially discovered the tomb, however, kept its location a secret until the tomb's rediscovery by its later owners, the brothers Sassi, in 1780. Although, with Piranesi's death in 1778, 2 years before the tomb's rediscovery, how could Piranesi have known where the tomb was? The realistic answer, he likely did not. While Giovanni Battista Piranesi died in 1778, his son, Francesco Piranesi, lived until 1810, allowing him to access the tomb and create the etchings, seen here to the left, of the actual inside of the tomb. Francesco went on to create other depictions of the tomb, including on the next slide. However, Piranesi had no knowledge of the real location of the tomb, likely only knowing that it existed on the Appian Way next to many other famous tombs of the era. Like the next tomb we'll talk about, the tomb attributed to Piso Licinianus. The tomb that Piranesi attributes to Piso Licinianus is another example of regal architecture befitting one of Rome's mightiest families. It is no wonder that it would belong to another magnificent family, the Licinii are one such clan. Its most famous member was Marcus Licinius Crassus, also just known as Crassus. Crassus was a member of the first triumvirate alongside Gnaeus Pompey and Julius Caesar. It is thought that Crassus was the wealthiest man in Roman history, with estimates from his contemporaries like Pliny listing his wealth at roughly 200 million sesterces. Depending on modern calculations, that could translate from anywhere between 200 million to over 2 billion modern US dollars. This tomb, however, is most likely meant to depict a specific branch of the family known as the Piso Licinii. Their most famous member, and the one Piranesi likely had in mind, was Lucius Calpurnius Piso Frugi Licinianus. This member of the family is noteworthy because of his wealth, adoption by the Emperor Galba, assassination during the Year of the Four Emperors, and for having an extremely difficult name to pronounce. Still, because this tomb was also not discovered in Piranesi's time, it is unclear if this is the one that Piranesi had. Piso's actual tomb was discovered along the Via Salaria in 1884. Regardless, the imposing tomb depicted in Piranesi's work, with Corinthian columns, a wide central niche, and a tall base, reflects the status of a family that once stood tall, but was inevitably laid low by the forces of time. So if these tombs are unlikely to be attributed correctly, what tombs are they actually showing? Well, without any detailed written record of what Piranesi was looking at, there is no way to know for sure. But there are at least some plausible matches. Piranesi's tomb of Piso Licinianus, for example, looks an awful lot like the tomb known as the Mausoleum of Quintus Veranius along the Appian Way. Although we have a different name for it today, modern scholarship still cannot prove who built this tomb, so even the modern name is likely wrong. As for the tomb of the Cornelii, the priest's hat tomb is the closest comparison that still exists on the Appian Way. As you can see, if this was the tomb that Piranesi was depicting, this would most definitely be an exaggeration. But its close proximity to the other tomb in this depiction, as well as its shared circular shape, allow for a connection to be made. Although we know nothing about the structure's classical history, we know that it might have been used as a church through the Renaissance and early medieval periods. Despite Piranesi attributing our tomb here to the Scipios, there were also other tombs that he claimed were related to the same family. Yet, despite all these mausoleums sharing similar locations along the Appian Way, they all represent different tombs. The following is the tomb of Priscilla, which scholarship has proven was constructed by a former slave of the Emperor Domitian.
That slave's name was Titus Flavius Abscantus, and he built this tomb for his late wife Priscilla. The tomb later became a tower fortification throughout the medieval and Renaissance eras. Afterwards, it became a simple location to store cheese by nearby farmers. Finally, the last etching that Piranesi attributed to the Scipios can be connected to none other than our familiar Casal Rotundo. While constructed during the Augustan era, as I mentioned before, it became a defensive structure in the medieval period, and we still don't know who built it to this day. Yet, Piranesi was known for other misattributions as well, from the Villa of the Maecenas to the Baths of the Sallust, to the Temple of the Comini and the so-called Grotto of Egeria. It is clear that Piranesi was likely depicting the mystery and mythology of these ruins as opposed to a real depiction of them. By capturing what we feel about how mysterious and ruinous the landscape was, Piranesi captured the cultural zeitgeist of the Grand Tour and its mythical feelings. These monuments serve as a reminder that no matter how much we flaunt our earthly wealth and influence, and no matter where we place our biggest monuments, eventually all inscriptions will wear away. And all that will be left is the mythology of our mythical past, and our names, no matter how deeply etched, will be ephemeral and inevitably be overshadowed by the greater names of our time. Before I go, I would like to share just one more story with you that highlights this theme. Percy Shelley was a famous English romantic poet who ventured on a grand tour only a few decades after the death of Piranesi. He wrote a great deal of poetry about his travels and observations, but one sticks out. In 1817, Percy Shelley wrote a poem based on the British Museum's newest acquisition of a partially ruined statue of Pharaoh Ramses II. It came from his mortuary monument. In this poem, the themes of ephemeral change are best illustrated. I'd like to end this talk by reading his words. The poem goes as follows. I met a traveler from an antique land who said, "Two vast and trunkless legs of stone stand in the desert. Near them, on the sand, half sunk, a shattered visage lies, whose frown and wrinkled lip and sneer of cold command tell that its sculptor, well those passions red which yet survive, stamped on these lifeless things, the hand that mocked them, and the heart that fed. And on the pedestal, these words appear. My name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair. Nothing beside that remains. Round the decay of that colossal wreck, boundless and bare, the lone and level sands stretch far away. Thank you.
Wonderful. You are a kindred spirit to Piranesi, the archaeologist, or the archaeologist. No, very beautifully researched and expressed. Yes, Piranesi, as you've described, incorrect in identifications, but obviously his knowledge of the literature and history to make those identifications, those mistaken identifications, was great. And then the sympathy, the sensitivity to the materials, the monuments themselves. How would you account for his acuity, his fascination, the depth of his knowledge, his fascination, depth of knowledge, and the sensitivity in relation to ancient history and monuments?
Well, it's funny. Piranesi is truly a proto-archaeologist because he was a man who clearly was very interested in the study of these materials, but also knew he needed to find a way to fund it. So he very cleverly chose to depict some of the bigger, more mighty monuments of Rome, but he clearly read about them. The Grotto of Egeria, which is a piece in our collection, has a very interesting inscription on it, a translation on it. It is a reference, I believe it's from Martial, one of his epigraphs. And it's very clear that it references directly the Grotto of Egeria. So Piranesi was a man who read, and he read a lot. And he wanted these depictions to be meaningful and to be something that a tourist could carry home with them, put on their wall, and say, this is what Rome is, and this is why I went.
Yeah, no, excellent. And Discuss a little, or describe a little, his relationship to his brother, who was even more, sort of initially versed in humanistic knowledge and history. I mean, that's traditionally cited as sort of the foundation of his interest in archaeology in the classical past. Do you think that's legitimate, or how did he come by this?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's fair to say, and I will admit that I am not as well read on his brother, but I do think that it's fair to say that whenever you're around those pieces of information, those resources, it carries over. What conversations are you having at the dinner table? And if it's with your brother, who's very knowledgeable of this past and of this history, you're going to be sharing that information. And I think that's a really important part of this puzzle too, and a big part of the reason why he is so historically inclined.
I think the anecdote that you're bringing up, Jonathan, and to help you out, John, is that it's often quoted that his brother taught him Latin, and he absorbed it so much so. And the myth that goes around Piranesi is that when he died, he didn't ask for verses of the Bible to be read to him, but he wanted to hear passages from Livy. Like, what a kindred spirit for a classicist, right? Or a historian as well. It's like, he wanted to hear Rome's ancient past read to him. So he truly knew the stories that you have brought up in your talk today.
And John, could you do one more slide?
Sure. Oh, that's...
There we go. Some of you may know this. It's Noli's, as he titled it, the Grand Plan of Rome, which, to give you a sense of how, well, it's 6 by 7 feet. It's one of the great feats of map making in human history, really. So accurate to the time in terms of block by block that there are historians, archaeologists still refer to it. But matter of fact, the city of Rome considered it its official map right until the 1970s. It is still the ancestor of modern maps. Now, I show it, one, because Piranesi was involved, Piranesi executed a smaller scale version of it shortly after. And it's part of Piranesi's, in effect, Piranesi's activity as an etcher. But I'm showing it also because I thought of his counterpart to the kind of archaeological, the rigor and the system of his approach, even if names were mistaken, to again form and reference. It's there in that map. And much as Piranesi's proto-archaeology, this map of Rome, yes, ancestor of modern maps of Rome, but these are visual, these are cultural predictors of the kind of will to encyclopedic knowledge about time, space, about the past, that are then the leitmotif of serious study in every realm come the 19th century. And part of how we come by the foundations of our knowledge, even if we no longer write or, read the comprehensive texts. So just, I thought, a visual, just a counterpart to your ancient and the kind of detail you went into, just this as related, closely related to Piranesi and about the contemporary world, and its lasting legacy.
Yeah, and that's a huge theme of Piranesi, right, is existing throughout the different epochs of Rome. We're not just talking about classical Rome. We also have to understand the context of Piranesi's time, who was his audience, and what was he depicting in situ. And a map like this does a really great job, I appreciate you adding this, Jonathan, of kind of pointing to where those things are, where Rome is in that in-between state. It's not the modern Rome that we know today, but it is still a Rome that features all of the sites that we might think of when we think of Rome.